Chapter 8. Baby Morgan. It was nearly midnight when Andrew reached the Page's house. He found Joe Morgan waiting for him. Morgan and his wife had been married for 20 years, and now, to their great joy, they were expecting their first baby.
"Oh, Doctor, I am glad to see you," said Joe. "My wife, come quickly."
Andrew ran into the house for his bag of instruments, and then hurried along to Morgan's home.
"I'll wait outside, Doctor. I'm too worried to come in," Morgan said when they arrived.
Inside, a narrow staircase led up to a small bedroom, which, though clean, had very little furniture and was lit by only an oil lamp. Here Mrs. Morgan's mother and a fat nurse stood anxiously by the bed, watching Andrew's expression as he moved about the room. Andrew smiled. "Don't worry," he comforted them. He knew that this case would demand all his attention. As there was nothing that he could do for the moment, he sat down and waited, thinking of Christine. At 3:30, he went over to the bed and saw that he could now begin his work. It was a long and difficult birth. Then, just as daylight was beginning, the child was born. Lifeless. As he looked at the baby's still, white body, Andrew turned cold. Quickly, he gave the child to the nurse and turned his attention to Mrs. Morgan, who was also close to death. Working with great speed, he seized a bottle and gave her a medicine to make her heart stronger. He then made a feverish effort to save her by other means. After a few minutes, her heartbeat strengthened. Seeing that she was out of danger, Andrew turned round to the nurse and shouted, "Where's the child?" The nurse looked afraid. She had put the baby under the bed. At once, Andrew knelt down and pulled out the child. Still kneeling, he examined the boy and decided that there was just a chance of bringing him to life. He jumped to his feet and ordered the nurse, "Get me some hot water, and cold water, bowls too, quickly." "But, Doctor, quick!" he shouted. When the bowls arrived, Andrew filled one with the cold water and the other with the hot water. Working with great speed, he then placed the baby first into one bowl and then into the other. He continued this operation for 15 minutes, but the baby showed no sign of life. "You're wasting your time, Doctor," said the nurse. "It's dead." But Andrew took no notice. He put the baby into hot and cold water for another 15 minutes. Having again achieved no success, he then made a last and more determined effort, pressing on the baby's little chest, trying to get breath into its still body. Suddenly, the baby made a movement. Gradually, its white face and body began to turn pink. After a few more minutes, it started to cry. "Good heavens!" the nurse cried. It's come to life." Andrew handed her the child. He felt weak, almost faint. His dirty instruments, cloths and bowls lay in pools of water on the floor. Mrs. Morgan was asleep, not knowing what had been happening. Her mother stood by the wall, praying. "I'll come back for my bag later, nurse," Andrew said. He went downstairs to the kitchen and put on his hat and coat. Outside, he found Joe. "All right, Joe," he said. "Your wife and son are both safe." It was nearly 5 o'clock. A few miners were already in the streets. As Andrew walked home, he thought, "I've done something. Oh, God, I've done something good at last." Andrew had a bath and went downstairs to breakfast. Miss Page, having discovered that his bed had not been slept in, gave him a severe look as he sat down at the table, and remarked, "You got home late. I suppose you were out enjoying yourself all night, drinking or getting into some other kind of trouble. You're as bad as all the other men we've employed. You can't be trusted." Andrew was too angry to reply. After the morning surgery, he went back to the Morgans. As he walked down their road, women whom he had never met smiled at him in a most friendly manner. When he reached the Morgans' house, he received a very warm welcome. He went upstairs to the bedroom. The little room, which had been so untidy only a few hours before, had been cleaned and polished, and his instruments carefully washed and put into his bag. There were clean sheets on the bed. The nurse rose from her seat, and, smiling at the mother and baby, said, "They look very well now, don't they, Doctor? But they don't know how much trouble they gave us." Mrs. Morgan tried to express her thanks. "We are very grateful to you, Doctor. Has Joe been to see you yet?" she asked. "No. Well, he's coming." Before Andrew left the house, the old woman gave him a glass of wine. 2 weeks later, when Andrew had paid his last visit of the day, Morgan, who was about to go abroad with his wife and child, called to see him. "Money can't pay for all that you have done for us, but my wife and I would like to give you this little present," he said, handing Andrew a cheque for £5. "But I can't accept this, Joe," Andrew said. He knew that the Morgans had very little money. "You must accept it. We want you to," Joe told him. "It's a present for yourself, not for Dr. Page. You understand?" "Yes, I understand, Joe," Andrew said, smiling. He took the cheque to the Pages' bank and told the manager, Mr. Rees, that he wished to open an account. Rees looked at the cheque and asked slowly, "Do you want this account to be in your own name?" Manson was surprised at the question. "Yes. Why? Is the amount too small?" "Oh, no, Doctor. We're very pleased to do business with you. You did say that you want the account to be in your own name?" "Yes, of course." "All right, Doctor. I just wanted to check. Good morning, Dr. Manson. Good morning." Manson left the bank, asking himself what the manager meant. It was some days before he was able to answer the question. Chapter 9. Joe Morgan's Cheque. Christine had gone away for a holiday, and Andrew felt lonely without her. The weather was hot and tiring, and life seemed dull. Then one day, Watkins sent a message, asking him to call at his office. The manager of the coal mines greeted him in a friendly manner. "Listen, Doctor," he said. "Emlyn and a number of the miners want me to hire you as one of the company's doctors." Andrew looked at him in surprise. "You mean—"
"I mean," Watkins said slowly, "that I would like to add your name to the list of doctors, so that any man who wishes to can leave Dr. Page and make you his regular doctor."
"I couldn't agree to that. It wouldn't be fair to Dr. Page," Andrew replied. "It wouldn't be honest." Watkins was disappointed.
"Think about my suggestion, Doctor," he urged Andrew.
"It's no use. I couldn't do it," he said firmly, though sadly. Wishing that he had never been offered this opportunity to improve his position, Andrew tried to take his mind off the matter by going to see Denny. But, to his disappointment, he found that Denny had been drinking and could neither behave nor talk sensibly. Andrew put him to bed and left. The next morning, after surgery, he went back to Denny's house to see how he was. He found him in an even worse condition. Swearing about Denny and the summer heat, Andrew hurried out to visit Philip's patients as well as his own. When he called on him in the evening, Denny shouted,
"The medical profession! It's the worst system in the world. It's not honest. Give me another drink."
He paused.
"Manson, you're a good man. I love you better than a brother. You and I should work together. We'd soon change the whole of this profession."
Denny nearly fell over, and Andrew put him to bed for the second time. For the rest of that week, he did all Denny's work. Then, on Sunday, Denny was quite well again.
"I understand that you've been doing my work for me, Manson," he said in a cold voice.
His manner was so cold that Andrew left the house at once in anger. "He behaves as if he has generously allowed me to do his work," Andrew said to himself. But his anger soon left him. He was fond of Philip and respected his honesty and skill as a doctor. When Andrew reached home, Miss Page shouted at him, "Is that you, Doctor? Dr. Manson? I want you!" "What's the matter, Miss Page?" he answered with annoyance. She came up to him. "What? You may well ask. Kindly explain this," she said, holding up Joe Morgan's cheque. Raising his head, Andrew saw Reese standing behind Miss Page. "Yes, you have reason to be surprised," Miss Page continued. "Perhaps you will explain why you paid this money into your bank account instead of into Dr. Page's?" Andrew felt hot with anger. "It's my money. Joe Morgan gave it to me as a present." "A present? It's easy to say that, now that he's abroad." "Write and ask him if you doubt my word." "I do doubt your word. You are trying to take over Dr. Page's practice. This shows the kind of man that you are. You consider only your own interests." Andrew moved towards them, his eyes on Reese. "Miss Page," he said, "unless you take those words back within 2 minutes, I shall bring an action against you in a court of law, and I shall punish your bank manager in a way that he has never been punished before." I only did my duty," the bank manager said weakly. "I'm waiting, Miss Page," Andrew warned her. She realized that she had said too much. I'm sorry." Andrew took a quick, deep breath. "Miss Page, there is something that I want to tell you. Last week I was invited to become an official doctor to the mining company, but I refused the offer because I did not consider it fair to Dr. Page to accept. Now I'm so tired of you that I have decided to leave. I give you a month's notice." She looked at him in surprise. "Lies! All lies!" she shouted. "You can't give me notice!" Andrew said nothing more. He went upstairs to his room and closed the door. Chapter 10. A New Post. Andrew began to search at once for another position. But he did not receive a single answer to his letters. He became very worried. How was he to live? Then one day, when walking sadly down the street, he met Denny. Knocking out the ashes from his pipe, Philip said, "I'm sorry that you're leaving, Manson." He paused. "I heard this afternoon that the Aberalour Medical Society is advertising for a new man. Aberalour, that's 50 kilometres down the valley. Why don't you try for the post?" Andrew looked doubtful. "Well, yes," he agreed slowly. "I could try." He walked home and wrote to the society. A week later, Andrew and 7 other young doctors went to Aberalour to be examined by the Society's committee. It was a fine summer afternoon, and Andrew liked Aberalour, which was larger than Drenefi, with good streets and shops, and green fields surrounding the town. "But I won't get this post," he told himself, as he waited his turn for examination. The other men were better dressed and seemed more confident than he. But what would Christine think of him if he failed? She would return to Drenefi either today or tomorrow. He had not told her about the post. He wanted to surprise her, and to win her respect by greeting her with the good news that he had been given the post. Andrew, the 3rd man to be examined, entered the committee room with a feeling of fear and determination. About 30 miners were in the room. At a small table sat a pale man with a kind face. He was Owen, the secretary. Owen, in a quiet voice, explained the medical system at Aberalour. "The miners pay part of their wages each week to the society, and out of this money the society provides the medical services, including a hospital. The society employs a head doctor, Dr. Llewellyn, 4 other doctors to help him, and a dentist. Each doctor receives a payment for every patient on his list." Owen turned to the committee. "And now, gentlemen, do you wish to ask Dr. Manson any questions?" Several voices began to shout questions at Andrew. He answered them calmly and returned to the waiting room. The next man then went in. The last man came back from his examination with a smile of satisfaction on his face. "I'm the winner," his expression seemed to say. There was another long wait. At last the door of the committee room opened and Owen came out. He called out, "Will you come in for a minute, Dr. Manson? The committee would like to see you again." His heart beating fast, Andrew followed the secretary back into the committee room, where he was welcomed by smiling faces. Owen now addressed him. "Dr. Manson, we will be honest with you. The committee, on Dr. Llewellyn's advice, had intended to hire a doctor with experience in this valley. but the committee now feels that you may be a better choice." Andrew was too excited to smile. "I should add, Dr. Manson," Owen continued, "that the committee has been influenced by 2 letters received from doctors in your own town. One is from a Dr. Denny, who has a very good degree, and the other, enclosed with Denny's, is signed by Dr. Page, by whom you are employed. These 2 doctors praise your work so highly that the committee would like to offer you the post." Andrew lowered his eyes, his thoughts on Denny's generous act. "There is just one difficulty, Dr. Manson," Owen added. "This post should really be given to a married man. The miners like their families to be attended by married doctors. Also, a house is provided." There was a long silence. They were all looking at him. At last Andrew said calmly, "That is all right, gentlemen. I am going to marry a girl in Drenefi." There were loud cheers. "Then, Dr. Manson, you are appointed," said Owen. "When can you start your duties?" "I can start work next week," Andrew answered. Then he turned cold as he thought, "Suppose that Christine won't marry me." A few minutes later, Andrew left and excitedly ran to the railway station to catch the next train home to Drenefi. When he reached Drenefi, he went straight to Christine's house to see if she had returned from her holiday. Finding, to his joy, that the light was on in her room, he rushed into the house. "Christine?" She looked at him in surprise. "Andrew, how nice of you to come round." "Chris, I have something to tell you." A worried expression spread across her face. "What has happened? Have you had more trouble with Miss Page? Are you going away?" He shook his head. "Christine, I've got a new post, an excellent post, at Aberalour. £500 a year and a house. A house, Christine. Oh, my dearest. Christine, will you marry me?" She went very pale. Her eyes were bright. She said quietly, "And I thought that you were going to tell me some bad news." "No, no, the best news, my dear," he cried. "Oh, Chris, I love you so much, but perhaps you don't love me." She went towards him and laid her head against his chest. As he put his arm round her, she said, "Oh, Andrew dear, I've loved you ever since I saw you walk into my school." Chapter 11. The Move to Aberalour. A few days later, they were married. On the same morning, they packed Christine's few pieces of furniture and pots and pans into John Lossin's old motor bus and drove slowly through the mountains to Aberalour. The weather was bright and sunny. They laughed and joked, and Lossin, a man without cares, kept pulling a bottle from his pocket to drink to their future happiness. They had lunch at a small hotel high in the mountains. Then they began to drop down into the valley leading to Aberalour, along a rough and narrow road with steep hills on either side. At last, after passing 2 dangerous bends, they caught their first sight of Aberalour. It was a moment of joy. The town lay before them, with its houses dotted up and down the valley. Its shops, offices, and churches were at one end of the town, and at the other end its mines and smoking chimneys, all lit up by the bright sun. "Look, Chris, look," Andrew whispered, pressing her arm tightly. "It's a fine place, isn't it? There's the square. And look, there's the gasworks. No need to use oil lamps here, dear. Where do you think our house is?" They stopped a miner, who directed them to Vale View. "Well," said Christine as they entered the large, ugly house, Vale View, that was now their home. It's nice, isn't it?" "Yes, dear, it looks a lovely house." Excitedly, they went into each room. There were so many rooms, and they were all so large that they only had enough furniture for 2 of them. They finished their tour of the house in the kitchen, where Christine unpacked some eggs and cooked a meal. "Heavens, dear, you are a good cook. That was the best meal that I've ever eaten," Andrew said in delight. "Oh, I am looking forward to starting work. There ought to be good opportunities here. Big opportunities." He suddenly caught sight of a box in the corner. "I say, Chris, what's that?" "A wedding present. From Denny." "Denny!" His expression changed. Philip's manner had been cold when Andrew thanked him for his help in getting the new post, and told him of his intention to marry Christine. This morning he had not even said goodbye to them. His unfriendly behaviour had hurt Andrew. Andrew slowly opened the box, thinking that it might be a joke. Then he gave a cry of delight. Inside was Denny's microscope and a note. "I don't really need this. Good luck." Andrew picked up the microscope, carried it into another room, and gently laid it on the floor, saying, "Owing to the generosity of our good friend Philip Denny, I shall now make this room my workroom." Suddenly, the telephone rang. "Perhaps it's a patient, Chris. My first Aberalour case," Andrew cried, and ran into the hall to answer the telephone. It was Dr. Llewellyn.
"Hello, Manson. How are you? I want to welcome you and your wife to Aberalour."
"Thank you, Dr. Llewellyn. That's most kind of you," Andrew replied.
"Nonsense, nonsense. Come and have dinner with us tonight. Then you and I can have a talk. We shall expect you at 7 o'clock. Goodbye."
Andrew hurried back to Christine to tell her about the invitation. "Wasn't that nice of him, Chris? The head doctor. And he sounded so friendly. Mrs. Manson, we are going to be successful." He put his arm round her and began to dance. Dr. and Mrs. Llewellyn greeted them like old friends. During dinner, while Mrs. Llewellyn was talking to Christine, Dr. Llewellyn told Andrew a few more details about the medical system at Aberalour.
"There are 2 surgeries, one at the west end of the town and the other at the east end," he explained. "You will work at the west surgery with old Dr. Urquhart and Gadge, who mixes the medicines. Here at the east surgery there are 2 other doctors, Dr. Medley and Dr. Oxborough. They're all nice men. You'll like them. Of course, I'm too busy to work at the surgery myself. I have so many other responsibilities. I'm in charge of the hospital. I'm medical officer for the town and hold several other important posts. I also have a private practice."
"You do have a lot of work," Manson remarked. Llewellyn smiled.
"I must make money, Dr. Manson."
He paused.
"I should just mention that the doctors have agreed to pay me a small part of their salaries."
Andrew looked up in surprise.
"That's because I see their patients for them when they're worried," Llewellyn added quickly. "But we'll discuss this matter at another time."
At that moment, Mrs. Llewellyn called to her husband from the other end of the table.
"They were only married this morning. Mrs. Manson has just told me so."
She took Christine's hand.
"My poor child, you will be busy trying to make that terrible house look nice."
Manson reddened. "It's true," he admitted. He paused. "Would it be possible, do you think, Dr. Llewellyn, for me to go to London for 2 days to buy furniture for our house?"
"Certainly. You can be absent from work tomorrow and the next day, Dr. Manson."
At 10 o'clock, Llewellyn drove Andrew and Christine to the hospital, where he had some patients to see. The hospital, though small, was well built and seemed to contain everything that was needed. As Llewellyn showed them round, Andrew thought, "This is perfect. I'll be able to treat my patients very effectively in here."
"I'm rather proud of this place, Manson," Llewellyn remarked.
Then suddenly his manner changed.
"Well, I can't waste any more time," he said quickly. "You can find your way home, can't you? Good night."
As they walked home together, Andrew said, "I like him. I like him very much. But why should we pay him part of our salary? It doesn't seem fair." When they returned to their almost empty house, they stood together in the dark hall. Then Andrew put his arm round Christine and whispered, "What's your name, love?" "Christine," she answered in surprise. "Christine what?" "Christine Manson." Her breath came quickly and was warm on his lips. Chapter 12. The System at Aberalour. They went to London and bought some cheap furniture, arranging to pay for this at the rate of a few pounds a month during the next year. On Thursday morning, Andrew began work at the West Surgery. His first patient was a man with a bad knee, who wanted a doctor's note stating that he was not fit for work. Andrew examined his knee and gave him his note. But the next 3 patients also asked for doctor's notes. Andrew got up, opened the door of the waiting room, and called out, "How many more men want sick notes? Stand up, please." 40 men were waiting, and they all stood up. It was 10:30 when Andrew finished his surgery. Then an old man with a red face walked into his room. This was Dr. Urquhart.
"Heavens, man,"
said Urquhart, without a word of introduction.
"Where have you been during these last 2 days? I had to do your work for you. Never mind, I'll say no more about it. Come and meet Gadge. He's a miserable man, but he's good at his work."
Andrew followed Urquhart into another room, where Gadge, a thin man with a sad expression, took hardly any notice of him.
"Well," said Urquhart, after introducing them, "is there anything that you would like to know?"
"I'm worried about the number of sick notes that I had to sign this morning," Andrew told him. "Some of the men seemed quite fit for work. A doctor shouldn't give sick notes for no reason." Urquhart looked at him quickly.
"Take care. The men will be annoyed if you refuse them their sick notes."
For the only time that morning, Gadge made a remark.
"That's because there's nothing wrong with most of them."
All that day, Andrew worried about the sick notes. He decided to give no more unless they were really necessary. He went to his evening surgery with an anxious but determined expression. The crowd was larger than at the morning surgery. The first patient to enter was a big, fat man who looked as if he had never done an honest day's work in his life. His name was Ben Chenkin.
"Sick note,"
he said roughly. "What for?" Andrew asked. Chenkin held out his hand.
"Skin disease. Look."
Andrew could see at once that there was nothing seriously wrong with Chenkin. He rose from his seat. "Take off your clothes," he ordered him. Chenkin now asked,
"What for?"
"I'm going to examine you." Chenkin, who had never been examined by the last doctor, undressed. Andrew carried out a long examination. Then he said sharply, "Dress again, Chenkin." He sat down and began to write out a note.
"I thought that you'd give me one,"
Chenkin said rudely. He seized the note from Andrew's hand and rushed out of the surgery. 5 minutes later, he returned.
"What's the meaning of this?"
he shouted, pushing the paper into Andrew's face. It read, "This is to state that Chenkin is suffering from the effects of drinking too much, but is quite fit to work."
"I've got skin disease,"
shouted Chenkin.
"I've had it for 15 years.
"Well, you haven't got it now," Andrew said. A crowd had collected by the open door. He could see Urquhart looking anxious, and Gadge with a faint smile on his face.
"Are you going to give me a sick note?"
Chenkin shouted. "No, I'm not," Andrew shouted back. "And get out of here before I throw you out." Chenkin looked as if he might kill Andrew. Then he turned and, shouting threats, left the surgery. As soon as he had gone, Gadge entered, rubbing his hands with delight.
"Do you know who he is? His son is an important member of the committee."
The Chenkin event caused a lot of talk. Some people were pleased that Chenkin had been made to work at last, but most people were on his side. As he went round the town, calling on his patients, Andrew received many black looks. And there was worse trouble for him. The men had the right to choose their doctor. Each man gave his medical card to the doctor of his choice. If he wished to make a change, he could ask for his card back and hand it to another doctor. Every night that week, men came to Andrew's surgery and demanded, "My card, please, doctor." Every card that he returned reduced his salary. Urquhart warned him,
"Take care, man. I understand how you feel. You want to improve matters. But take care. Think before you act."
Andrew soon ran into more trouble. He was called to the home of Thomas Evans, a miner who had burnt his left arm. When Andrew arrived, he found that the area nurse, who had since left the house, had put oil on the burn. Andrew examined the arm and saw that unless he changed the treatment at once, the arm would become infected. So, with great care, he cleaned and treated the burn and put on a new bandage. "Will it be all right, Doctor?" Evans asked anxiously when he had finished. "Yes, quite all right," Andrew smiled. "Leave this to Nurse and me." Before he left the house, he wrote a short note to the nurse, thanking her for what she had done and asking her to continue his treatment. Next morning, when he went back to the house, he found that his bandage had been removed and that the arm had again been treated with oil. The nurse was waiting for him. "What's the explanation of this?" she asked angrily. Andrew felt annoyed, but he managed to smile. "Now, nurse, I've worked here for 20 years, and nobody has ever told me before not to use oil on a burn." "Now, listen, nurse," Andrew tried to reason. "There's a danger of infection. That's why I want you to try my treatment." "I've never heard of this treatment. Old Dr. Urquhart doesn't give it. I refuse to take orders from a man who has been here for only a week." It was dangerous to quarrel with the nurse, but Andrew could not risk his patient's health. He said in a low voice, "If you won't give my treatment, nurse, I shall come in every morning and evening and give it myself." "All right, do!" the nurse shouted. "And I hope that Evans lives through it." She then rushed out of the house. In silence, Andrew attended to the damaged arm. When he left, he promised to return at 9 o'clock that night. But that same evening, Mrs. Evans went to his surgery and, in a frightened voice, said, "I'm sorry to trouble you, Doctor, but can I have my husband's card back, please?" Andrew rose without a word, searched for the card, and handed it to her. When he returned home after surgery, he was very silent. After supper, he sat down beside Christine and, leaning his head against her, said sadly, "Oh, my dear, I've begun so badly." Tears came to his eyes. Chapter 13. The Vaughans. Andrew had a very difficult time. All Chenkin's friends and relatives were his enemies, and the area nurse tried to persuade his patients to leave him. He had another bitter disappointment. Dr. Llewellyn refused to let him use the hospital. "What do you think happened this morning, Chris?" Andrew said to his wife with disgust. "I wanted to give a man treatment in hospital, my first hospital case, and so I telephoned Llewellyn and asked his permission. Well, Llewellyn drove round in his expensive car to examine the man personally. He was very pleasant. He agreed at once to admit the patient into hospital. But then, before I could thank him, he told me that he would take over the case. He said that he attends to all the hospital patients and that... what does it matter what he said?" Andrew was beginning to consider himself a failure. But at the end of that week, he received a visitor. Late one evening, the doorbell rang. It was Owen, the secretary to the society. Andrew turned white. Did the committee intend to dismiss him for his failure? Were he and Christine to be thrown out into the street? Then suddenly Owen produced a yellow card. "I'm sorry to call so late, Dr. Manson," he said, "but I want to give you my medical card. I would like you to be my doctor." Andrew could hardly speak. "Thank you, Mr. Owen. I'll be delighted to add your name to my list." Christine, who was standing in the hall, invited Owen into the living room, where they sat and talked. "Don't lose heart," Owen comforted Andrew. "The people here are not easy to understand, but they are really very kind. When they know you better, they will like you, and their manner towards you will change." Before Andrew could reply, Owen asked, "Have you heard about Evans?" "No? That oil, which you warned the nurse not to use, did exactly what you were afraid would happen. He's lost the use of his arm, and will never be able to work again." Andrew expressed his sorrow. He felt very sad that a wound which could have got better so easily had ruined Evan's life. After a short silence, Owen told them that he saw his purpose in life to make life happier for the miners of Aberalour. He wanted to improve the medical services, to build better houses, and to make the mines themselves healthier and safer. At this stage, Andrew told Owen that he believed that the dust from a certain kind of coal caused lung disease. "These men work in the coal dust all day," he said. "They breathe it into their lungs. I may be wrong in my opinion, but I don't think so. What excites me is that nobody seems to have thought of this before," he added eagerly. Owen leaned forward. "My goodness, Doctor, this is really important." They had a long discussion. It was late when the secretary left. As the front door closed behind Owen, Andrew thought, "That man is my friend." The news that the secretary had given his card to Andrew spread quickly, and helped to make the new doctor a little more popular. One afternoon in December, Andrew was returning home. He saw coming towards him a young man whom he recognized as Richard Vaughan, a director of the Aberalour Mining Company. He tried to avoid him, but to his surprise, Vaughan called out in a friendly voice, "Hello! You're the man who sent Chenkin back to work, aren't you?" Andrew stopped. "I would like to have seen old Chenkin's face," Vaughan laughed. "It didn't amuse me." Taking no notice of this remark, Vaughan said, "You're our nearest neighbours. My wife will pay yours a visit now that you have settled in." "Thanks," Andrew said coldly, and walked away. When he reached home, he told Christine about their meeting. "Why was he so friendly? It's a mystery to me," he said. "I've seen him pass Llewellyn in the street without even looking at him. Perhaps he hopes to persuade me to send more men back to work at his mines." "Oh, Andrew, don't be so stupid," said Christine. "That's your great fault. You're so suspicious of people." "I am suspicious of Vaughan. He's proud, and he has too much money. He's not sincere. His wife won't come to see us." But Mrs. Vaughan did call on Christine, and Christine enjoyed her visit. 10 days later, Mrs. Vaughan telephoned and invited them both to dinner. Andrew answered the telephone himself. "I'm sorry," he said. "I'm afraid that we can't come. I work at the surgery till 9 o'clock every evening." "But not on Sunday?" Her voice was warm and pleasant. "We shall expect you to dinner next Sunday. Goodbye." Andrew ran back to Christine. "These rich friends of yours have invited us to dinner. We can't go." "Now listen to me, Andrew Manson," Christine said firmly. "You must not be so foolish. We're poor, and everybody knows that we are, but that doesn't matter. The Vaughans are rich. but they're kind and clever people. Why shouldn't we be friendly with them? Don't be ashamed of being poor." They went to the Vaughans on Sunday, and they received a warm welcome. There were 2 other guests, Mr. and Mrs. Challis. Andrew, who had never been in such a grand house before, felt awkward. At dinner, a simple but good meal, he sat next to Mrs. Vaughan, who tried to start a conversation by asking him how he considered that the medical services in Aberalour might be improved. "Well, I don't know," he said, as soup ran from his spoon onto the tablecloth. "I suppose—" He could not discuss even his favourite subject. He looked down at his plate until, to his relief, Mrs. Vaughan turned to talk to Challis, who had an important post at Cardiff University. Christine was quite relaxed. Andrew saw her smiling at Challis, heard her take part in a most informed discussion. It surprised him to hear how well she argued with Challis. Several times she tried to bring Andrew into their discussion. "My husband is very interested in the coal miners, Mr. Challis. He's doing some experiments on the breathing of coal dust."
"Oh, yes?"
said Challis, looking with interest towards Manson. "Isn't that so, dear?" Christine encouraged him. "Oh, I don't know," Andrew answered. "It's of no importance." He was angry with himself. Perhaps this man Challis might have helped him. For some strange reason, he began to direct his anger towards Christine. As they walked home at the end of the evening, he was silent. Christine remarked happily, "We did have a nice time, didn't we, love?" "Oh, a very nice time," Andrew said bitterly. Next day, his manner was the same. Then, in the evening, Mrs. Vaughan sent Christine some books and flowers, and this kind act led to a quarrel. "Look, love," Christine cried. "Isn't Mrs. Vaughan kind?" Andrew stiffened. "Very kind. Books and flowers from the rich lady. I suppose that you need these things to help you to live with me. I'm too dull for you. I'm not one of those clever people that you met last night. I'm just a doctor." "Andrew, it's true, isn't it? I could see by your behaviour at dinner last night. You're tired of me already." "How can you say such a thing?" Andrew ran from the room, closing the door noisily behind him. For 5 minutes he walked up and down the kitchen. Then suddenly he ran back to Christine and took her into his arms. "Chris, my dear," he cried, "I'm sorry. Forgive me. I'm just a jealous fool. I love you with all my heart." They held each other